If Hormuz locks up, prices jump fast, everywhere. Iran was sold as contained risk, but the Iran crisis in 2026 proved containment is a myth. One weekend of US strikes on Iran, and the Iran versus Israel conflict suddenly looked like an Iran war. Then the Ali Khamenei death rumor hit, and the room temperature changed worldwide. Oil didn't need to vanish for a Middle East oil shock to start. Fear can do it first. And when fear touches fuel, it quietly touches rent, groceries, and business costs. Surface narratives make it sound simple. Strike, retaliation, done. But the reality is more like stress fractures in concrete. Tiny cracks, then a sudden break. Iran retaliation isn't a single event. It's a chain where an Iran missile attack becomes a signal. The Ali Khamenei successor fight adds a wild card because leadership uncertainty breeds hard moves. And the Strait of Hormuz crisis turns the whole region into a pressure valve for global trade. By the end, you'll understand what actually detonated this Middle East War 2026 moment. You'll see how retaliation spreads, why escalation becomes addictive, and where the real leverage sits. You'll also know what to watch next, signals that matter more than loud headlines. Because the scariest part of an Iran war isn't one strike, it's what becomes normal. Stay until the end, because the final question might flip how you think about this entirely. Chapter 1. The strike that changed everything. What happens when a war starts by aiming for the top guy? That's the uncomfortable question behind the Iran crisis in 2026. Because this wasn't another shadow war headline or a proxy skirmish. It was US strikes on Iran, paired with Israeli firepower, hitting the core. And the reported Ali Khamenei death instantly made the Iran versus Israel conflict feel like an Iran war, not a threat. Here's what's known so far. The US and Israel launched joint strikes, and Iranian outlets reported the Ali Khamenei death. That's historic escalation because it crosses from pressure into direct state-on-state confrontation. Think of it like yanking the steering wheel on a highway to avoid a crash, and realizing you just started a pileup. In the background, markets and governments price in chaos, oil risk, shipping risk, and a Middle East War 2026 premium. And once that fear hits, it doesn't stay in Tehran. It shows up in costs and decision-making everywhere. The strategic message was blunt. This wasn't containment, it was decapitation-level signaling, whether or not everyone admits it out loud. So what's the immediate consequence? Iran reads it as existential, which makes Iran retaliation more likely, faster, and harder to control. That's where the Iran missile attack scenario creeps in, and suddenly, the Strait of Hormuz crisis isn't a theory. It's leverage with pricing power. Two solid starting points for historical context are All the Shah's Men, Stephen Kinzer, and The Persian Puzzle, Kenneth Pollock. But the unresolved risk is the real kicker. Once this line is crossed, what target stays off-limits in the next 72 hours? Chapter 2. Why Khamenei's death shook the Iranian regime. Here's the twist. The Ali Khamenei death didn't just remove a leader, it yanked out the system's keystone while the building is under attack. In the Iran crisis in 2026, that's like losing the team captain mid-championship game. So what happens next? Order, panic, or a power grab behind closed doors? And when Iran's top command looks uncertain during an Iran war, everything gets jumpier. Khamenei wasn't just a cleric with a title. He sat above the entire state, with sweeping authority over the machinery that keeps the regime standing. The official succession process exists on paper, but wartime pressure can turn it into a brutal contest, not a calm transition. That's why the Ali Khamenei successor question matters. Different factions have different ideas of strength, and they'll sell those ideas with action. There's talk around hardline continuity and talk around stability figures. But talk isn't power. Control is. And whoever controls security and messaging controls the tempo of Iran retaliation. Think of it like a company losing its CEO during a hostile takeover. Employees freeze, rivals pounce, and the value swings wildly. That's Iran right now. The IRGC's loyalty, elite unity, and public calm become the battlefield, not just missiles. And the more uncertain the top looks, the more tempting prove-it escalation becomes. For deeper background, two strong reads are The Iran Wars, J. Solomon, and Treacherous Alliance, Trita Parsi. But here's the unresolved tension. If the regime can't settle succession fast, does that vacuum push escalation or fracture first. Chapter 3. Iran's retaliation. Missiles, drones, and a wider battlefield. Everyone expected Iran retaliation, but not like this, and not this wide. Because an Iran missile attack isn't one punch back, it's a broadcast to the whole region. And in the Iran crisis in 2026, that broadcast says, no one nearby is truly out of range. So when people say Iran versus Israel conflict, the real question is, where does it spill next? That's how an Iran war stops being a two-country story and turns into a map that keeps expanding. The retaliation toolkit is layered: missiles for shock, drones for saturation, and regional pressure to stretch defenses thin. Think of it like trying to stop leaks in a boat while someone keeps poking new holes, left side, right side, then underneath. That spillover hits US linked interests and regional targets, and suddenly the Middle East War 2026 feels less over there and more in the system. Insurance rates jump, shipping routes detour, security costs surge, and that's when prices and inflation start acting weird. Even if oil supply doesn't drop, fear alone can price in a Middle East oil shock before anyone sees the shortage. Now add the leadership uncertainty from the Ali Khamenei death, and you get a dangerous mix: anger, confusion, and competition inside the chain of command. That's why the Ali Khamenei successor fight matters. Different factions may prove strength in different ways, at different targets, on different timelines. And if the Strait of Hormuz crisis becomes a leverage tool, the whole world watches energy markets flinch in real time. If you want a simple investing lens, it's the classic risk-off playbook. Energy exposure, defense, and broad market hedging get louder in the conversation. But here's the unresolved risk. What happens if one retaliation strike triggers a misread, where both sides believe they have to escalate? Chapter 4. What happens next? Regional war, regime survival, or global escalation? The most dangerous part of the Iran crisis in 2026 isn't what already happened. It's what becomes normal next. Because once US strikes on Iran and the Iran versus Israel conflict cross into open confrontation, the menu of options changes. Think of it like a messy breakup where both sides start keeping score instead of looking for exits. Now every Iran missile attack, every drone wave, every cyber hit becomes a test of pride and deterrence. And with the Ali Khamenei death still fresh, the Ali Khamenei successor question hangs over every decision like a storm cloud. Scenario 1 is the simplest and the ugliest. Escalation spreads until the Middle East War 2026 is a true regional war. That means more fronts, more targets, more miscalculations, and a world that starts pricing in a permanent Middle East oil shock. Scenario 2 is regime survival through consolidation. A hardline successor locks the system down, purges rivals, and doubles down externally to prove strength. Scenario 3 is managed de-escalation, where both sides back away publicly while still trading blows in quieter ways. Less visible, but still corrosive. It's like a house fire where someone turns down the flames in the living room, while the attic keeps smoldering. Now here's what viewers can actually do with this. Treat it like a risk environment, not a one-day headline. For investing, a practical framework is boring on purpose. Diversify with broad market ETFs, avoid overexposure to single-country risk, and think in sectors that historically react to energy shocks. For reading the situation without getting manipulated, follow primary signals, shipping alerts, oil spreads, central bank language, and defense posture, not just viral clips. In plain terms, this is where geopolitics reaches into political stability. Governments get pressured, budgets shift, and security priorities change fast. But the unresolved tension is the one nobody can answer yet. If Hormuz becomes the leverage point again, does the world accept the Strait of Hormuz crisis as a new normal, or force a showdown? This Iran crisis in 2026 isn't a history lesson, it's a live system under stress. If you understand how an Iran war spreads, you stop getting surprised by price spikes. You also start spotting signals early: oil movement, shipping disruptions, and sudden policy shifts. For investing, the practical move is boring but effective. Diversify, avoid all-in bets, and plan for volatility. And for daily life, it's the same logic. Keep your eyes on energy, inflation, and stability. The biggest trap is thinking outcomes are already decided. They aren't. Conflicts like the Iran versus Israel conflict swing on misreads, incentives, and pressure points. So build a smarter information diet. Compare sources, track what changes week to week, and ignore rage bait. If you want a habit that works, do a 5-minute signal check daily. Oil, shipping, markets, official statements. Because when the Strait of Hormuz crisis flares, the first casualty is usually clarity. So let's talk. Do you think Iran retaliation is meant to scare or to expand? Does the Ali Khamenei successor struggle make the situation more dangerous or more controllable? And what do you think is the real red line? A bigger Iran missile attack or a Hormuz shutdown? Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep learning how geopolitics, economics, and power shape your everyday life. Because the Middle East War 2026 story doesn't end when the news cycle moves on.